You know, there's something about the holidays that brings back memories more vividly than anything else. Every December, just as the cold sets in and the sky takes on that pale winter color, my mind goes straight back to a time when Christmas felt warmer, slower, and somehow more honest. A time when the heart of the holiday didn't glow from a screen, but from a small wooden box on the dining room table filled with envelopes. Christmas cards, handwritten, stamped, and carried across states by real people with real hands and real lives. It feels strange to think how something so ordinary could once hold so much meaning. Back in the America of the 1950s and 60s, Christmas cards weren't optional. They weren't an afterthought or a quick stop at the drugstore on December 23rd. They were part of how we lived. Sending cards meant you were connected, that even across distance you remembered someone enough to take a little time, find the perfect card, choose a pen that didn't smear, and sit down at the kitchen table to wish them something good. There was nothing automatic about it. Everything was intentional. Families didn't scroll through templates or pick from digital designs. They went to Woolworth's or Ben Franklin or the local Hallmark store, sometimes spending half an hour just comparing boxes. The thick cardboard boxes with cellophane windows were stacked high, each promising 20 or 30 cards inside with matching envelopes. Every card a tiny masterpiece in its own way. You opened the box and the scent of ink and paper hit you, the kind of smell that modern printing can't quite replicate. Hallmark dominated the aisles in those days. Gibson and Norcross weren't far behind. These companies didn't make cards the way companies do now. The artists who worked for them were illustrators, real painters and designers, drawing scenes that felt alive. Mid-century art had its own language. Angular silhouettes, bright starbursts, stylized houses with geometric roofs, color palettes full of teal blues and cherry reds. Some cards had flocking, that soft velvet texture on Santa's coat, or snowdrifts. Others had foil accents in gold and silver, catching the light in a way that made the images shine even in dim rooms. And glitter was everywhere. Not the fine glitter you see today, but the chunky kind that stuck to your fingers and made the carpet sparkle until Valentine's Day. One of the most popular styles was the mid-century modern Christmas card. They featured abstract Christmas trees, atomic-era stars, and stylized reindeer with impossibly long legs. They looked futuristic, yet cozy, perfectly matched to the 60s aesthetic. Another was the Americana card. Warm, firelit living rooms, children hanging stockings, families ice skating, cozy scenes printed in rich reds, deep greens, and warm browns. Then there were the foil-stamped cards, often religious in tone, with a nativity scene surrounded by shimmering halos. Nativity cards were extremely popular during that period. The figures were drawn in soft pastels or deep jewel tones, often inspired by the European illustration styles of the early 20th century. Santa cards were a world of their own. In the 60s, there were two dominant Santa styles. One was the jolly Coca-Cola Santa, plump and bright, with rosy cheeks and a joyful grin. The other was the more traditional Father Christmas style, slimmer, dressed in long robes, sometimes in blues or golds rather than red. The first type felt commercial and cheerful. The second felt old world, almost magical. Families would debate which was their Santa. Some families chose cards with snowy landscapes. Those were iconic. Little cottages with smoke drifting from chimneys, yellow windows glowing against the navy blue sky, tall pine trees dusted with snow. The designs had that comforting American feel, the sense of home that people wanted to send across the miles. Winter scenes were so popular that some stores sold out of them early every season. Many cards were trifold or bifold, some with tiny windows cut out revealing another illustration inside. Others had a tall, narrow shape that made them feel elegant, almost like a bookmark. And some cards came with envelopes lined in decorative paper, stripes or holly or silver stars. Every part of the design felt thoughtful. Families treated card sending like a holiday event. Card night was almost sacred. Mom would bring out the good pen, the one that didn't smudge. Dad would pour a drink and lean over the table, flipping through an address book with worn edges. Kids hovered nearby, either helping apply stamps or writing their names under their parents' signatures. There was a ritual to it, choosing which card went to which family, writing a little extra message to the aunt who lived alone, including a short update for the neighbor who moved away, carefully thinking about every word. Some families added holiday newsletters. These were typed on crisp white paper using a typewriter. The letters were full of family updates: who started school, who changed jobs, who bought a new car, who won a science fair, or lost a tooth. They were honest, simple, and personal. Families looked forward to them. In a way, those newsletters were the original status updates, except they came once a year and carried far more heart. And then there were photo cards. Before Photoshop, before filters, before perfect lighting tutorials, families took one decent photo, developed it at the drugstore, slipped it into 20 or 30 envelopes, and called it a day. Kids with crooked collars, dogs moving at the last second, Christmas trees leaning slightly to the left. The imperfections made those cards perfect. Once the cards were signed, addressed, and stamped, they made their way to the post office. December post offices in the 60s had a very particular smell. Cold air mixed with wool coats, ink, paper, cardboard, and that ever-present hint of old radiator heat. People stood in line holding stacks of envelopes tied with string. Children looked at the Christmas stamp display cases, admiring the new designs each year. In 1962, the famous Red Angel stamp came out. In 1963, the Evergreen Wreath. These stamps became mini collectibles, repeated year after year because families liked matching their mailbox traditions. And when those cards started arriving, oh, it was magic. Kids ran to the mailbox each afternoon, brushing snow off the cold metal handle, pulling out a handful of envelopes, and running back inside yelling, "We got more cards!" The envelopes were chilled from the cold, sometimes slightly bent, always cherished. Families displayed their cards proudly. Living rooms became galleries of handwritten love. Cards taped around doorframes, cards strung across the wall like garlands, cards clipped to a ribbon on the mantel, cards arranged neatly across the piano, the coffee table, the bookshelf. The more cards you had, the more connected you felt. It made the room feel warm, full, alive. And then, bit by bit, the tradition began to fade. In the 1980s and 90s, cards were still common, but not quite the same. Families were busier, postage got more expensive, technology crept in. By the early 2000s, e-cards appeared. It felt novel at first, then convenient, then normal. But somewhere along the way, the pen left the table. The boxes of cards disappeared from department store shelves. People started to say, "I'll send something next year." And then next year became the year after that, and eventually the whole tradition began to slip through our fingers. Today, Many people don't send any cards at all. Weeks go by, and the mailbox stays empty, except for bills and catalogs. And every year, right around mid-December, I feel a little tug in my chest. I think about the way the table used to look, scattered with envelopes and cards and pens. I think about handwriting, real handwriting, the way it shows personality in every loop and curve. I think about how a card arriving in the mail used to make someone feel remembered. Sometimes I wish we'd bring it back, not to replace technology, not to be difficult or old-fashioned, but because something happens when you sit down, pick up a pen, and write a card to someone. You slow down. You think. You put care into every stroke. You give a small piece of yourself. A real connection in a world that feels increasingly disconnected. You might think people don't care anymore, that handwritten cards would go unnoticed. But I'll tell you something I've learned over the years. It means even more now than it did back then, because it's rarer, because it takes effort, because most people don't do it anymore. A card arriving in a mailbox today feels like a small miracle, the kind of miracle we could all use a little more of. When I look back at the cards of the 1960s, what strikes me most is the artistry, the innocence, the sincerity. It's not that everything was perfect back then, far from it, but there was a gentleness in the way we reached out to one another, a desire to stay close, even when miles apart. I remember the sound of the envelope knife slicing open the flap, the whisper of thick paper sliding out, the way the foil lettering caught the light, the moment you recognized the handwriting on the front and felt a small warmth settle in your chest. You felt seen, even if only for a moment. And I sometimes wonder what would happen if everyone decided just once a year to pick up a pen again, to send a card, to let someone know they were thought of. It wouldn't fix the world, but it might mend a thread here and there, and maybe that's enough. So when December comes around each year, I sit at my table with a stack of blank cards. Not as many as my parents sent, not enough to fill a wall, but enough to keep the tradition alive in my little corner of the world. And I write, one card at a time, one name at a time. And for a few minutes, the world feels like it used to. If you grew up in that era, you know what I mean. You remember the cards with the glittery snow, the ones with the peaceful church steeple, the ones with Santa smiling in that warm Coca-Cola way, the elegant nativity scenes framed in gold, the modern cards with sleek mid-century trees, the cozy family scenes full of light from the fireplace. You remember the handwriting, the stamps, the mailbox ritual, the joyful clutter of displayed cards. Those cards were more than decorations. They were reminders of connection, of family, of care. And even though the world has changed, that feeling is still there, waiting to be rediscovered. Maybe this year, write one card, then two, then five. Not because you have to, but because someone out there might open their mailbox and feel that small burst of Christmas warmth. The same one you felt long ago. The same one we're still capable of giving. The tradition doesn't have to stay in the past. It's not gone. It's just sleeping, waiting for us to wake it up again. And maybe that's the gift we can give each other today. A little time, a little ink, a few words on paper. A reminder that even in a busy world, some traditions are worth holding on to. Because Christmas cards weren't just part of the season. They were part of us. And they still can be. Even now, all these years later, I can still picture the stores where we bought our Christmas cards. You couldn't miss them. The moment Thanksgiving ended, the front displays changed overnight. Woolworths, especially, knew how to create a feeling. They'd set up long aisles lined with shelves of boxed cards, each box tilted just so, catching the overhead lights. The smell inside the store was something you don't forget. A mix of new stationery, cinnamon-scented candles, winter coats drying in the warm air, and that faint chemical smell of the photography counter in the back. It felt like stepping into December itself. Ben Franklin's stores had a different charm. Their holiday displays weren't as polished as Woolworth's, but they had a small-town warmth. You'd walk past racks of yarn, kitchen gadgets, and children's toys to find the seasonal section. The Christmas cards were usually stacked near the registers, wrapped tight in their crinkling cellophane. Older folks liked buying their cards there because you could still talk to the clerk and ask, "Do you have anything with church scenes?" Or, "Got any cards with the long Santas?" And they'd know exactly what you meant. Sears and J.C. Penney carried cards too, tucked near their gift wrap or photography departments. Their boxed sets always felt a little more refined, especially the ones with gold edges or envelopes lined with metallic paper. In those days, walking into a Sears during Christmas season meant walking into a small indoor town. The scent of roasted nuts from the concession counter, the artificial pine smell from the artificial trees, the hum of elevators, the muffled holiday music playing from tinny ceiling speakers. Somewhere between the toy section and the household appliances, you'd find a tall rotating rack with hundreds of individual cards. You'd spin it slowly, hunting for the perfect design. Drugstores played their own part. Every neighborhood had one. Rexall, Walgreens, Liggett's, with a narrow aisle dedicated to stationery. But come December, that aisle exploded with color. You'd see Hallmark displays perched on the end caps, offering boxed sets in every style. Santa flying over rooftops, glistening winter cottages, nativity scenes, choir boys, wreaths, angels, snowflakes, poinsettias. There was something calming about standing in front of those shelves, reading messages printed inside each card, comparing fonts, checking the thickness of the paper, deciding which style felt right for that particular Christmas. And every family had their card-buying ritual. In ours, Mom always insisted on buying cards early, usually the first week of December. She claimed that if you waited too long, all the good designs would be gone. She wasn't wrong. People in those days took their Christmas cards seriously. If a store sold out of a certain style, you'd hear about it in church that Sunday. Choosing the right box of cards could take half an hour. My mother would pick one up, slide it slightly open, examine the sample card in the front, close it, put it back, then pick up another. Dad would stand patiently, hands behind his back, humming along with the music playing overhead. Meanwhile, I'd wander around picking up toys or looking at the candy display until Mom called me back to ask, "Which one do you like better? The cottage with the horse-drawn sleigh or the one with the gold-foiled church window?" The funny thing was, whichever one I picked, she always chose the other. Looking back, I suspect she asked only to make me feel included. And it worked. I felt like part of the tradition, part of the decision-making. Christmas cards mattered to families, to neighborhoods, to the very rhythm of the season. And then there were the photo studios. That was a whole event of its own. Before everyone carried cameras in their pockets, before filters and digital editing, getting a family photo meant going to a real studio. Those studios smelled like flash bulbs and fresh paper. They had props, sleigh bells, fake snow, small trees draped with garland, glitter-covered stars. Some studios had painted backdrops showing snowy windows or fireplaces. Others preferred minimalist styles, a simple chair, a plain curtain, and a soft spotlight. Families dressed up for these sessions. Moms curled their hair and wore Christmas brooches. Dads put on their best sweaters or suits. Children were brushed, combed, and positioned like carefully arranged ornaments. You'd sit under those hot studio lights, trying not to blink while the photographer barked instructions about posture and smiles, and if the baby cried or the toddler wriggled too much, the whole session could take an hour. But the results were worth it. Those photos ended up in envelopes sent across the country. Grandparents, cousins, old friends, everyone got a little piece of your life in the mail. Inside those envelopes, sometimes people tucked black and white prints, sometimes color ones if they could afford it. You could feel the texture of the photo through the envelope, thicker and smoother than the cardstock. Pulling it out felt like receiving a tiny gift. You'd study it closely, the outfits, the expressions, the tree in the background, because those images told real stories about real families, not curated impressions. As for the post offices, they were their own world during December. I remember the sound of heavy doors creaking open as people carrying bags of parcels pushed their way inside. The air inside was a mix of cold drafts from the doorway and warmth from the aging radiators. You always heard footsteps echoing on the tile floor, the sharp smack of stamps being pressed onto envelopes, and the clatter of sorting machines somewhere behind the counter. The line moved slowly, but no one seemed to mind. People chatted with one another. Kids pressed their noses against the glass display showing Santa stamps and commemorative holiday envelopes. If you got there early enough, you could smell coffee wafting from the clerk's counter where someone had left a mug steaming beside their stacks of mail. There was a shared patience in those rooms, a shared understanding that this was part of the season, part of the work of Christmas. Back home, after the cards were mailed, came the part I remember best, the signing nights. Families didn't rush through them. They made an evening out of it. The table was cleared, the good tablecloth laid down, the pens lined up. The box of cards sat in the center like a centerpiece. Names were read from the address book one by one. Some families even kept small notes from previous years tucked between the pages. Who moved? Who had a new baby? Who got married? Addresses were handwritten carefully, with people double-checking zip codes that were still fairly new in the 60s. Each signature carried personality. Some people signed with sweeping cursive flourishes. Others used tight, neat letters like school teachers. Couples signed together, parents first, children squeezed underneath in uneven, childish handwriting. Some wrote poetic greetings, some wrote jokes, some kept it simple. But everyone wrote something. The point wasn't to impress, it was to connect. And the envelopes. There was something almost comforting about the process of addressing them, sealing them, pressing stamps into the upper right corner. Kids loved helping with stamps, licking them even though they tasted like nothing pleasant. Sometimes you'd line up 20 envelopes in a neat row and apply the stamps one after the other, feeling the paper soften slightly under your fingers. Even as I look around the world today, with so much communication happening in digital bursts, I still think there was something deeply human about those evenings. A kind of quiet devotion to the people in your life. A recognition that relationships mattered enough to sit down and give them a moment of thought, a line of ink, a card chosen with care, and perhaps what I feel most as the years pass is how rarely we do that now. We text, we email, we send fast messages with fast words, but we rarely sit down with a blank card and fill it with our own handwriting. The kind of handwriting that reveals your mood, your age, your personality, your quirks. The kind of handwriting that turns a simple message into something personal and warm. I think about that sometimes, how fewer and fewer cards arrive each year, how the mailbox grows quieter, how December feels less full without those little envelopes that once piled up day after day, and I wish, quietly, sincerely, that this tradition would come back. Not in a nostalgic, unrealistic way, not because the past was perfect, but because there's something in the act of writing a card that still feels right. Something that slows you down, that makes you think of others more deeply. Something that reminds you of what this season is supposed to be about. And so, every year, even now, I buy a box of cards. I take my time choosing them. I pick up the pen, turn on some old holiday music, and sit at the table the way we used to. And as I write, I can almost hear the sounds of those old signing nights, smell the paper and ink, feel the warmth of a time when the simplest gestures carried so much meaning. Card by card, name by name, the world feels a little kinder.